Some systems that get used in the cars. I don't know, I guess you could call them systems. I guess you could call them, I don't know, peripherals, necessaries, accessories. I don't really know what you would call these. I'll walk you through them. I got four that I want to show you that are all important, but I don't know, maybe you can tell me what they're called. But yeah, this is work that was done before we started the series. This is work that can be done kind of between seasons when you're waiting for a new rule set to come out, because there are just certain things that, you know, typically don't get changed from rule set to rule set. So, you know, and I'll walk you through a few of them. So the first one that you see here might be obvious to some of you, maybe not. This is a homemade gas tank, built it, fuel cell, gas tank, whatever you want to call it, built out of an old air tank. So this will get mounted inside the back of the car here, and we'll have a gas tank protector built around it. And you know, it's a fairly straightforward design. Got an overflow here. This was just taken off of the original. There used to be kind of a pressure gauge that was here, so we took that out and just put a 3/8 hose fitting here, and that's for your overflow. Drilled a nice hole in the top of the tank and welded in a piece of pipe with threaded end, and we can cap the gas tank with this cast iron cap. So that works nicely. Drilled a hole in the bottom here, as close to the bottom of the tank as we could get, and welded a smaller steel pipe, threaded on the end. Added this. This is just a valve that can be opened and closed if you're moving the tank around with fuel in it and you don't want it to leak out. And then an additional 3/8 hose barb here. And so our fuel line will be attached here. There will be an electric fuel pump that sits somewhere in the line, probably has some fuel filters in there, and that'll be what pulls gas out of the tank. And then for it to mount into the gas tank protector, angle iron has been welded to the bottom of the tank with some holes that way we can bolt it in. And then just to be on the safe side, if you can see that, we welded a little piece of angle iron here so that if there was any kind of crimping that occurred in the back in the gas tank protector, that the tank itself wouldn't necessarily have to take all of the force of that. You have this piece of angle iron here for that as well. So fuel, obviously, we're running 8-cylinder engines in these. They're gas hogs. You know, you want to have fuel, and so it's an important part of the car. And typically the rules around fuel cells don't really change. They need to be steel, they need to be safe, and so you can take them from car to car to car. And so we weren't too worried about this with the new rules coming out. The next one, this is not a necessity for every car, but it is a nice to have. And when you get these old cars, sometimes the pedals are in bad shape. This is a pedal setup. This pedal setup started life, it was fabricated by someone other than myself. It's got the brakes here. It's got the brake cylinder here. And it started just as a brake pedal. And this plate, you bolt it into the floor on the driver's side. And what I've added to it is I've added a gas pedal. So the way that this gas pedal will work is a cable will run through here, up through the firewall, up towards the carburetor, and will kind of weave its way through the car, and the spring tension on that throttle will keep this up normally most of the time, and then my foot will push this down, obviously, for gas. So this is now went from just a brake pedal setup to a brake and gas pedal setup. And the cool thing about this is any kind of car I get, depending on whatever shape the pedals are in, and pull those old pedals out and just take this plate and this whole setup from car to car. And the other nice thing about it is that, you know, being able to bolt this plate into the floor, sometimes you get cars with rusty floors or the floors are weak, and it firms up the car. You know, now you have something nice and firm to set your feet on in the driver's side floorboard. So that is another item that's pretty important. This one is really important, and more important than pedals, as important as fuel, is keeping your transmission cool. This is a transmission cooler, and some angle iron has been welded to the sides of a this is actually a 20 millimeter ammo case. And so these pieces of angle have been welded to the sides, and then there's a plate underneath. So this can bolt to the passenger side floorboard in the front. And instead of running your transmission lines through the radiator like you would on a normal car, the radiator has a section that the transmission fluid runs through to keep your transmission cool. Radiators get hit in Derby a lot. They blow up. The crowd loves it. It creates a big puff of steam and steam blowing out the front of the car. The crowd goes wild. And, you know, motors can run without water for a time, but transmissions, when they get hot, they don't work. They don't want to shift. They can blow up. I mean, you want to keep your transmission cool, and so most shows will allow you to run your transmission fluid through a separate cooler. So this sits on the passenger side in the car, typically bolted in, and this is one I homemade myself. I don't know, we're gonna see if it works. I wanted to try and see how much I could cram in here, but I'll show you the inside. Inside here is close to 30-40 feet of copper tubing. It's got a couple little kinks in here. I did test it with fluid. I did put some fluid in it, and then I put the air compressor on it to see if it would push all the way through. It does. That being said, we'll see how well it flows. But your transmission lines are going to come right off a transmission, and you're just going to loop them through this. So you got one going in, one coming out, back to the transmission. And then this is an icebox cooler style. So right before the show starts, this ammo case with the copper tube in here will get filled with ice and water just all the way to the brim, so that all of this copper tubing is submerged underneath that cold water. And as the hot transmission fluid flows through those copper lines, you know, it bleeds all heat out of these copper lines, and so the fluid coming back out to the transmission is nice and cool, keeping your transmission cool, keeping your transmission from catching fire. So that is a icebox style transmission cooler. I've seen ones that are much bigger. Another style is you can have just kind of a condenser or a radiator, smaller radiator with a fan on it, and run your transmission kind of an air cooled. This is a water cooled. I want to close. Too much copper pipe in here. Can't close it. Ah, well. Hopefully we can close it the day of the show. The last one I'm going to talk through, you know, seems simple, but this is just a little switch box that I made. And I'll show you the inside of it. It's got enough space. This is for 3 switches, and I added a portion for a push button starter. So I'll just kind of unscrew this and show you guys real quick this setup. This uses light switches. I wouldn't recommend that you use a lot of the light switches that are sitting around at Home Depot or Lowe's. They're 15 amp light switches. some of the power getting pushed through these is going to exceed the 15 amps, and I've burned out my fair share of cheap light switches. So what I do now is you can get ones, and I'll show you here on the side. I don't know if you can see this, but that is rated at 30 amps. These are 30 amp light switches. They're a little more expensive, but they will, you won't burn them out. And so, you know, figure if you burn out a 15 amp light switch every other show, you'd be better off just going and buying the bigger 30 amp light switches and not having them burn out on you every show. So I've got 3 of those in there, and typically the way you can set these up is you could set one up for an electric fan or an auxiliary. You would set one up to turn on and off your ignition, run power to your ignition system. And then you could set one up for a fuel pump. So if I want to turn my fuel on, you know, so fuel, ignition, fan, and then I would have a push button that screws in here. That is what would start the car. That would go to your starter. And then on this one, I welded a little piece here, and with some hose clamps, some big hose clamps, I just kind of rigged a tachometer onto this one. A lot of guys run other gauges. They'll run like an oil pressure gauge. You know, they want to make sure that there's still oil moving through the motor so that they don't blow up their motor. I just run a tach, and the only reason I run a tach is because sometimes it's so loud out there. If my car has stalled, sometimes I can't hear when the car starts back up, and so usually when I'm out in the heat, I'll look at this, and when I see the needle start bobbing, I know the car is back on. And I've flooded cars trying to start them, just because it is very, very loud out there. And then once you have your helmet on, the volume only increases, well, it decreases inside the helmet, but you don't hear anything other than people hitting your car and the roar of the other engines around you. You know, some guys know that their motor's running by looking to see if there's smoke coming out of the headers. I mean, there's all sorts of tricks. I just like a tachometer. So, you know, these things, this is where, when I talked about in the first episode, is ways that you can save money in Derby. This is kind of one of them. You know, if you can build your own stuff, and then you can take that stuff from car to car to car, you know, over time, that brings the cost of the hobby down a little bit. You know, if you're buying new stuff for every new build, you know, you got more money than I do. But fuel tank, pedals, a transmission cooler, and a switch box. 4 things that are just great things to have and pretty necessary for the sport of Derby. So hope you guys like this quick little video, and you know, we'll be doing bigger and better stuff on future videos. Obviously a lot more to go on the build, but I thought I would just pause and show you some of the stuff that's already been done. So have a great night.